Hey everybody, and welcome to Bible class. Can you join me in 2 Samuel chapter 12, where we'll begin reading and studying together as we continue our exploration of the United Kingdom. We've talked about Israel's first king, Saul. We are in the life of Israel's second king, David. We have watched as the territory he reigns over is much larger than that of Saul. The Lord has been with him. The Lord has blessed David in a variety of ways. But we left off in our last study hearing a dark promise delivered to David by Nathan from the Lord. You remember these words in 2 Samuel 12, where the Lord asked, "Why have you despised the word of the Lord to do what is evil in his sight? You have struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and have taken his wife," remember her name was Bathsheba, "to be your wife, and have killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, God promises to David, the sword shall never depart from your house." Throughout this study, we have watched as King Saul lost his way. We just heard in 2 Samuel 11 and 12 about David losing his way. Beginning in 2 Samuel chapter 13, we're going to read about David's family losing their way. There are many heirs that eventually come from David, but God has promised difficult days ahead. We'll dig into 2 Samuel 13 in just a moment. Could I raise a red flag that we were told about several chapters before this in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 13, where David, after he began to reign in Jerusalem, he took more concubines, more wives from Jerusalem after he came from Hebron, and more sons and daughters were born to David. We might explore as a class why this probably set David off on the wrong path a long time before all of these events. For now, David's firstborn son was named Amnon. David had another son from another woman named Absalom, and 2 Samuel 13 tells us that Absalom had a beautiful sister named Tamar. But in 2 Samuel 13, we begin to see the fulfillment of God's dark promise against David's household when Amnon attacks Tamar. And when King David hears about this, 2 Samuel 13, verses 21 and 22, it tells us that he was very angry. But that's it. We don't read about him doing anything else. Verse 22, Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon. 2 years go by, and eventually Absalom arranges for all of David's sons to be together, and when they're together, he commands his servants to kill Amnon, David's firstborn son, the son that attacked Tamar. At that point, Absalom flees, and he stays away for the next 3 years. When he eventually comes back to Jerusalem, he lives another 2 full years without ever coming into David's presence. Already, we're beginning to see some tough things coming in the life of David's family. Let's pick up in 2 Samuel 14, verse 24. The king, when Absalom comes back, says, let him dwell apart in his own house. He's not to come into my presence. Was that the best way to handle what was going on? We might explore that as a class. Absalom lives apart in his own house. He doesn't come into the king's presence. He lives 2 full years, verse 28 tells us, in Jerusalem without coming into David's presence. But I want you to notice, especially in 2 Samuel 15. Let's start reading in verse 1. After this, Absalom got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. And when any man had a dispute to come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, from what city are you? And when he said, your servant is of such and such a tribe in Israel, Absalom would say to him, see, your claims are good and right, but there's no man designated by the king to hear you. Then Absalom would say, oh, that I were judge in the land. Then every man with a dispute or cause might come to me, and I would give him justice. And whenever a man came near to pay homage to him, he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Thus Absalom did to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. After years of doing this, Absalom eventually sends secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, and he tells them, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then say, Absalom is king at Hebron. Absalom is trying to steal the throne from his father David. David, who has to flee Jerusalem for a little while. But eventually, Absalom gets caught. He's out riding. In 2 Samuel 18, verse 9, he happens to meet the servants of David. And as Absalom is riding on his mule, the mule goes under the thick branches of a great oak, and his head caught fast in the oak. He was suspended between heaven and earth while the mule that was under him went on. Joab, the leader of David's military, and some of his men kill Absalom. In 2 Samuel 18, verse 33, when David hears this, he's deeply moved. He goes up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would that I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son. David sinned in 2 Samuel 11. In 2 Samuel 12, God said, this is so serious that the sword is never going to depart from your house. We've seen King Saul lose his way, King David lose his way. Now David's family begin to lose their way. All of these people need a Savior. It's a sad, sad part of the story. So let's dig in together and see what else we can learn. Thanks so much for being in class. Hope you have a great rest of your class and a great rest of this week.